5,000 people, at least in the state of Maine, that are homeless currently. We have such a staggering deficit in mental health across the nation, but especially here in Maine. The longer you stay homeless, I think the propensity to using drugs also goes up. So in 2014 to 2022, the count was pretty steady as far as homeless children in Maine. If you had to guess that number, what would you guess?
1,300. That number is probably much higher. It's very underreported.
Do you feel that the Mills administration is giving you the support and or resources that you require?
I think we could definitely use more. If you pay $0 a month after working at a nonprofit for 10 years, your student loans are forgiven because you're working at a nonprofit.
Okay. Welcome back, bub. Today is a special video. I am going to be conducting interviews throughout February, and today's first interview is with my close friend, Courtnie. She and I have been friends since before the panini, and since then, I've moved away, and she and I haven't kept us in touch, but a lot has changed in her life, including the reason that I'm interviewing her today. Courtnie is now the Director of Homelessness Outreach here in Oxford County. I thought that it would be a great way to get a first-person perspective on the situation, realistically the crisis facing Maine, getting more of an explorative look into it and what we as a population, as Mainers, and globally, because there's more homeless people around the globe than ever before. So if we can start addressing the issues now while they're early, then we have a better chance of overcoming the situation. So without more ado, I'm going to let Courtnie introduce herself and kind of just talk a little bit about where we are, the location, and maybe just about how you came to this position.
So my name is Courtnie. I'm the Homeless Outreach Coordinator for Oxford County. Right now we're in our shelter that's being rehabbed. This is a shelter in Norway. We also have 2 in Rumford, and we have 1 in Leeds. This one is being fixed right now, so we're down 14 beds. I previously worked in mental health as we had a maternity group home program, and I ran a homeless shelter. Now I work with unsheltered individuals, so it's people that aren't able to go to the shelter because either they're actively using, single male, the shelters are full, or they're on the sex offender registry, they have violent criminal history or drug history, whatever reason, they're not able to come to the shelter. So I work with a lot of people that live in tents and under the bridges and in their vehicles and all of that.
So I did a quick search earlier on the population of Oxford County. Oxford County as a whole is large, but population-wise is pretty small. So that must have its own unique challenges.
It does. It means we have more limited resources, but because it's a smaller community, we have a lot of agencies and individuals that rally together like a small town does. But because it's so rural, transportation is always an issue, housing is an issue, and even though the population is small, the area that we have to cover is huge. I'm the only outreach case manager for homelessness in all of Oxford County, so it goes all the way to Freiburg. It's a fairly big area.
Yeah, if you're familiar with Maine, if you're not, just go ahead and look up Oxford County. So it is a large area, which makes it challenging because you have to drive to these individuals.
Right.
So a lot of your job must be on the road and just kind of connecting where people are at.
It is, and one of the biggest things that we do is we meet them where they're at. If we're able to meet with them and just provide blankets, and that's all they're willing to accept right now, because a lot of people that we work with are really hesitant about receiving help from anybody. They're very wary about it because they associate us with government, and they don't want anything that they think that there's going to be strings attached, or they don't want their name in a database or whatever it may be. So sometimes it's just showing up and offering food and blankets. And
I think that's really encouraging, just in general, that in a first world society, you would want to hope that there are programs that meet people where they're at, because it's not always feasible for people to come to you. Sometimes, a lot of times you need to go to them, especially as a first step. So it's really encouraging that there are programs like this out there. Oxford population is about 58,000 individuals as of 2020, which is fairly small, but again, the area is vast. And to me, it always comes back to the fact how everything seems kind of connected.
Mm-hmm.
We have homelessness crisis here in Maine, but then also we have a severe lack in public transit.
Yeah.
And to me, I keep coming back in notes and whatnot. What if we just had a better public transit system? Which makes it complicated because we are such a spread out area. However, there are places, Alaska and other communities, that are small in number, the geography is vast, but you can still have connected resources, people. Because here in Maine, we have jobs, but sometimes finding the people to work those jobs and connecting to them are difficult. And you have people that are willing to work, you have jobs that are willing to hire, but if you can't get the two to meet, then it's no bueno. So a lot of it seems connected, where yes, we're having a homelessness crisis, but why?
Right.
And that, I just kind of want to lead into that. What do you think are some major contributing factors as to why it seems that we're having an explosion in homelessness here in the Maine, but also nationally?
Well, the cost of living is skyrocketed, and if you look at what minimum wage is and what people want for rent, it's not doable. If you look at the cost to move in, it's first month rent plus security deposit and sometimes the last month's rent. So that's a big chunk of money that people can't come up with. So even people that could be self-sufficient moving in to a place, they don't have the funds to be able to move in. But then of course there's also people that have struggled with substance abuse, or they're actively using, lack of housing. There's landlords just don't want to rent to certain people, especially in a small community. It's nice that everybody rallies together, but it's also really easy to get
on the outside.
Yes, where you're well known in a community for the wrong reasons. And even if people aren't actively using and they're sober and they're trying to improve their lives, landlords are hesitant to put themselves out there for risk. We have some that work with us in the area that are really awesome, but they have limited places also. And then we just had the flood, which wiped out a good portion of the apartments that we had, which made people that we had previously gotten housed homeless again. So it was,
And there, to me, it's more interconnection, because you have BlackRock, you have investment groups wholesale buying up ugly homes for cheap, giving people cash on the spot, and then flipping those houses for exorbitant fees, or then renting them back to individuals at unsustainable rates.
Absolutely.
And so you have BlackRock being interconnected, but also the floods and everything. Like, what are we doing for natural disasters and recovery? And I mean, that alone impacts. And then also you have people moving from out of state because of the panini. You have people that now can work remotely, so they're making city money, but they want the comforts of a small community, so they're moving to locations like Maine. Maine is the number one sought after destination to move to in 2023, and also in 2022 it made the top 3. So consistently now for a couple of years we've been the hot destination, which is great for the economy in some regards, but then because of the floods it's putting small businesses out of business because insurance screwed them over. So then you have businesses here in Maine, but a lot of them are major box stores where they're chain and they're everywhere. So there's no difference if you're in Maine or if you're in New Hampshire or elsewhere. So to me, just dealing with this one issue, it's so profoundly interconnected to everything. To try and just deal with homelessness on its surface would be such a shallow cleanup job that you're going to have the same issues within no time.
Yeah, and Maine is very diverse in the sense of income. Like, you have the coastal towns where you have really high income families that live there in the summertime and they have these huge properties, but then in the wintertime they're not there, but their income still counts. So it's the cost of living there is higher because they're in a higher tax bracket because it's a summertime destination place.
Yeah.
And it's the same with like River Valley, Maine. The River Valley area is big in the wintertime. It's with Bethel, the skiing between Sunday River and Black
A
Mountain.
lot of money flows through that area in the winter.
And then they leave and it leaves, minimal there in the summertime.
Yeah. And Courtnie and I met on the mountain. So we met in the River Valley area, and that's where I lived. She lives on the outskirts of that area. But that's part of the problem, is that workers have to live on the outskirts of these areas because they can't afford to live in those areas directly. I lived right in town Bethel, and it was so unsustainable to live there.
Right.
Even as two working men making full-time incomes, it was difficult. And that's one of the big deficits, is Maine is vacation land. Mm-hmm. So we have booming seasons. And it can be winter or summer. A location generally isn't going to be both. It's going to be one or the other. So unless you're willing to move between coast to mountains as an individual, then there's going to come a lull at some point.
Right.
Or, like myself, I have to drive an hour one way to get to a job that pays me a fair wage and allows me to live the lifestyle that I want.
Right.
So there's an hour. And the place that I work, more people could be working there, but because it's a coastal destination and public transit is almost non-existent, it makes it very untenable. In my head, I keep making this mind map where I'm like, okay, so we have homelessness that we're studying, but off of that, there are so many things.
You're kind of treating the symptom of something that's larger.
Yeah.
And it's important that we do treat that, and these are people with real lives, and these are real people that we're dealing with. And we have, we'll get people that is situational homelessness, like from the flood or house fire, situations like that, domestic violence. But then we get people that are chronically homeless. And then if you get them housed, they are uncomfortable, and they've almost been homeless for so long that they're more comfortable outside. I've gotten people housed and they say that they have to sleep with the windows wide open and their head as close to the window as they can so they feel and hear the outside. And it's just been the way that they've lived.
And that was the other interconnectedness that I was thinking of leading into that I forgot earlier, is mental health. Mm-hmm. Mental health is we have such a staggering deficit in mental health across the nation, but especially here in Maine. It's mind-blowing because so many problems stem from that.
Yeah, it used to be fairly easy. I used to do community case management, and it used to be fairly easy for somebody to get a case manager and be able to link them with resources to manage their mental health, and counselors and med managers. And then they put a lot of limits and restrictions on case managers. So unless you are in the justice system, getting out of jail, getting out of a psych hospital, homeless, or you have schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, it's really difficult to get a case manager. So it's almost like until you get to that problem area of being homeless or in jail or in a hospital, you can't get a case manager. So instead of preventing it, we're kind of treating it afterwards.
That's kind of like giving yourself Tylenol to deal with a headache rather than rehydrating to get rid of the headache altogether. And that's unfortunate because once you're to that point, you're in a really bad state. No matter who you are, if you're in those circumstances, life is already hard. So to get out of that hole, it takes double or triple the effort than if we were to put the brakes on 3 or 4 steps before that.
Right. And there's a lot of people that aren't able to keep up with the paperwork to keep their main care active without a case manager. They're not able to do those tasks. And so then they lose their insurance, they can't afford their medication for their mental health, and then they self-medicate with substances or alcohol, and then,
then they
it's a
become
slippery
the
slope.
Problem that we're trying to avoid.
Everybody thinks that people that are using, it's an active choice that they're making, but a lot of times it's either doctors have prescribed something and they're on it for a certain amount of time, and then they're like, okay, you can't take it anymore, but then they find elsewhere, they realize that the cost of that is too expensive, so they go to something less expensive like heroin or meth, and they start using that, and it's scary.
Having grown up in Waterville, it is a opiate hive mind. There has been a lot of cases of opiate overdose in Waterville, and I've known that a long time, and part of me moving out of there was not wanting to get involved, but also if you stay, then you almost do get involved.
Right.
And to me, I don't look at addicts as the problem. Addicts are always going to exist. But are we going to enable certain behavior, especially when it's a bad addiction? Because to have an addictive personality doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person or mean you're going to get involved into bad things. You could be addicted on like an obsessive level with competition and moderation, obviously always moderation. So enabling the behavior where addicts are always going to exist. So what we need to look at is, why is heroin and other opiates so readily available? Like, if we were to stop the supply, then the demand would go up, but eventually it would cease because people would get clean, it would be too difficult, it'd be too expensive, there would be barriers in the way. But I remember going to Waterville, and this was before marijuana was legal, just trying to buy some marijuana. And my friend I was visiting back home, she told me that they didn't have marijuana, but that she had Suboxone instead.
Yeah.
And I was like,
That's quite the leap.
These are not, no, I do not want Suboxone. Like,
Yeah.
maybe the price range, like, oh, you were going to spend $25 on marijuana and you can get Suboxone for $25. Maybe, I don't know.
I'd be like, I'm sorry, I'm out of coffee, but you want some crack.
Yeah. I don't have caffeine, but I can get you up.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. I mean, marijuana wasn't legal. It is legal now. But then you have illegal marijuana farms, Chinese farms across the state that have pesticides, herbicides, bacteria involved. People that are trying to help with mental health in a holistic kind of way, in ways that have proven to be beneficial. Now we can't even trust that. So much of this is connected, because what are we doing about that? What are we doing about homelessness in Maine? From the outside, there are small cooperatives, there are small groups, but by and large, it doesn't seem like the state of Maine is really addressing this crisis head on like it should. It's more fractured. Whoever can rally is grabbing whatever they can and doing what they can.
Right. And we have a rally coming up. The River Valley area is awesome it's really big about recovery. So we have the River Valley Recover Strong. So we have the substance abuse rally coming up. It's March 9th.
March 9th.
And it's right in Rumford. We have the Larry Labonte Recovery Center. It's all like government funded and done by donations and everything. I can get you information. I can get you the flyer on that.
I'm gonna write that down before I forget.
I can print off the flyer for you for the rally. But it's a really great program between the Options program in Rumford, Rumford Group Homes, and then we have the River Valley Healthy Coalition and the Larry Labonte Center. Like, everybody really works together. When I had previously left the field, it was very separated. So it was like, you had Rumford Group Homes, you had Oxford, like all the different agencies, but they were very separated. And when I came back, it was nice to see that they'd come together for, a common goal.
Awesome.
So it seems like there's more community integration and more getting people on board and doing more awareness.
More cohesion.
Yeah.
So on a small level, that's really encouraging.
It's enormous.
Do you feel that the Mills administration is giving you the support and or resources that you require?
I think we could definitely use more, and I think we've taken it beyond a state level. Like, I don't think we're trying to utilize a state level, because they're the ones that have put the limits on case management, and they're the ones that have put the limits on, they do help with a lot of funds as far as like food stamps for people and emergency funds and housing and all of that. But as far as getting people into recovery and kind of more of a preventative standpoint rather than dealing with an emergency after it's happened, we've really taken it to a community level, which if every community was able to say, okay, this is our small community and we're going to take care of our community, or others that reach out.
And that's what I keep saying on this channel is, to me, it doesn't make sense to try and help people in Portland if my direct neighbors are suffering.
Right.
So if every community, if every 20 miles took care of their 20 miles before doing anything else, took care of their own 20 miles, homelessness, energy crisis, all of it just fixated, focused on theirs, and then each community did that. Because one community is not going to know what's best for another community. And in a state like Maine, maybe it can be similar, but across the nation, there cannot be any one wholesale answer. So Maine, small community, Oklahoma, small community, we do our own things differently before branching out to our neighbors.
Right.
then we help others.
It's kind of filling your own cup before you can pour in others. Every community has its own challenges. River Valley, we had the flood, which I mean, I know the whole state was affected by that.
But it devastated Farmington.
Right.
Like, devastated.
But like the River Valley area, we have that, whereas Lewiston Auburn has completely different issues and struggles that we don't have to deal with in the River Valley area.
There's more crime, more city crime, more direct involvement.
And there's more like overpopulation and all of that versus Rumford, Mexico, like the River Valley area, we don't have to deal with that. So our effort shouldn't be going towards trying to deal with issues that aren't present in our community. Versus they have their own stuff that they have to deal with. They shouldn't be necessarily concerned about our transportation issues or lack of transportation issues or lack of employment and housing because they have that there. So
just
they have
because transit
struggles.
works in Portland doesn't mean that same transit style is going to work in Oxford County.
Right.
And for Oxford County to focus on something like that would be wasted time and effort.
Right.
And vice versa. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's where it would be nice for the Mills administration to not micromanage, but to allow, to hear you out and be like, okay, well, you're a single case manager, so we either need to introduce another case manager or we need to open up your availability so that bureaucracy and paperwork aren't preventing people getting off of streets. It can be very uncomfortable to live outside for at least half the year. There's challenges with...
Because in the summertime, like, I don't know if you've ever woken up in a tent in the summertime.
Stifling.
It is so hot.
At
so
6:30
like,
in the morning.
Yeah, like I've met with people in tents, and it's either really hot or really cold, and then trying to keep, like, people are asking about like different struggles and stuff, and like even keeping paperwork that, like, I can give them paperwork, and even if they're capable of me being able to drop off paper, because I have a heavy caseload, so me being able to say, I know that you're capable of filling out this paperwork, fill it out and get it back to me. If it rains, that paperwork's, it's wet.
Yeah.
Like, you can't set it down somewhere because of the condensation. It's wet. It's
muddy.
You know.
It's so there's going to be something.
Yeah.
In Oxford County specifically, other than these buildings, are there? Well, this is women and children only.
Correct.
There's also family homeless shelters.
Yeah. So we have the only shelters in Oxford County. So we have one in Norway. That's the one that we're at right now, and it's being redone. We have two in Rumford that are family shelters. So it's either single women or families or men with children. We just don't do, the only single male shelter around is in Lewiston. It's St. Martin's.
Which is not Oxford County, but it's next
That's
door.
Right. And then we have another shelter in Leeds that is the same. It's a family shelter. And it's not a typical, like a lot of shelters, you go in, you stay the night, you have to be out in the morning. Ours is a family shelter. It's 24 hours. They come in, they have a bedroom. They're expected to do chores. They cook their own food. It's like a home environment, like a shared. They have shared living spaces, like the living room, TV. They have Wi-Fi. It is a home because they live there for, some people are there for a year.
Yeah,
and
a transition home.
Right, and they work with our case manager on housing and mental health and physical health and getting benefits that they need. But if you look at the fact that we have the only 4 shelters in Oxford County.
And it's a large area.
And it's
geographically.
So my people aren't in the shelter, and I have recently had over 40 people. So it's like that's 40 people that aren't in the shelter.
So that's 40 people that are living in tents, under bridges,
in
or
vehicles,
just
and it's and there's a lot more people. That's just the people that I have.
Those are the people that have come forward to ask for assistance. Categorically, Mainers, we're stubborn. We don't like to admit fault. We don't like to admit when we need help. We don't like to ask for help when we know we damn well need it. And we have a hard time accepting help when it's freely offered and unasked for. And
I think when somebody comes and says, especially people that have had a difficult life, when somebody comes and says, "Let me help you," they're very weary about that.
Yeah,
they're very
it's skittish.
But actually, this week is the point in time count. They do a count of all of the homelessness in the whole state of Maine.
Yeah,
and
which has been alarming because. I forgot that, it's on the 24th. In 2021, the number from point in time count, guess in 2021, the homeless. Of course, this is just what was counted, so it's not going to include everyone.
I'd say probably close to 1,500.
So in January 24th, 2021, it was 1,097, which is relatively small number, especially for 1.3 million people.
Right.
But of course, those are only ones that have come forward.
Right.
However, 2 years later, January 24th, 2023, what do you think the homeless population was at?
2023?
It was at 4,258 people.
Yeah, it is.
Which has exploded.
Mm-hmm.
And which means that we're about to get new numbers. Just as
with,
if you had to guess, based on that trajectory, where do you think we're going to be at now?
I'm torn because there are more programs now. Like the PATH program that I do is a fairly new program, and it has been successful. I've been able to get people housed. Unfortunately, some of the people that have gotten housed got unhoused because of the flood, but I would say it'd still probably go up. I'd say over 5,000.
I'm thinking at least 6,000.
And I think we're able to count more too because of the more programs that we have. I think.
Okay.
And as they tear down old places, there are people that homelessness wasn't as visible before because people were squatting in those places.
They were always under bridges or down by the river. Even growing up in the 90s, that was a thing. Some people opted to live like that. It wasn't even necessarily that they were homeless. It was more a choice that they preferred life like that. So that was a way of life. We had the hermit in Maine for 18 years. So it's a thing Mainers tend to do. Like, hey, just leave me alone.
Right.
So my thing that confuses me a little bit is that in 2021, we're fresh out of the panini at that point. I almost would have thought the numbers would have been reversed because maybe there was so much help at that point.
I think
government help.
The unemployment.
Yeah, so it kind of confuses me there because I would have thought that number would have been higher and this one's lower, but that just shows you that the panini has long-lasting effects.
Absolutely.
And we are still going on 5 years later, which is nuts. Going on 5 years later, we're really only now feeling the repercussions, the aftermath as it is. So I also have some counts for specifically homeless children in Maine. This one's harder to do. In some regards, families are more likely to seek help when they have children, so maybe it's easier to count children. So in 2014 to 2022, the count was pretty steady as far as homeless children. If you had to guess that number, what would you guess?
1,300.
Okay, so 2014 to 2022, it was a steady 1,294.
Okay.
So 1,300. So then 2022 to 2023, there was a rise to 2,100. So it basically doubled, and it was steady. It was steady for nearly a decade, and that's just the numbers I found. It could have been actually steady much longer than that.
Right.
So I think it's gut-wrenching to think of homeless children, because children cannot consent to anything.
Correct.
And even if they want to get out of the situation and they're willing to work, there's government program. There are things hindering those children from making money to pay for things. Children can't sign loans. Children can't sign contracts, can't leases, none of that. So children, when they're homeless, to me, that's especially egregious because they have no option. So to hear that number's rising and at an alarming rate.
And I think that number is probably much higher. It's very underreported, especially when you think about ages like 13 to 18. Because these kids,
those are still legally children.
And they leave a parent's house and they're going to stay with friends. Or they're going to be couch hopping. They're going to be, and those ones aren't reported. And that is a giant portion of homeless children. Because it's ones that we're counting are homeless in families. These aren't kids that are
on their own.
Because there's a huge population of kids that are on their own for different reasons.
That raises some questions. Do you think Maine's education system does enough to educate young people about resources that are potentially there for them?
I think it's come a long ways. I think previously I would have said no. Now I know we've been invited to speak at schools, even middle schools, about this is the cause for homelessness and this is what you can do to help, and this is pandemic in the state of Maine, and it's not just the state of Maine, but we focus on.
But you can only focus on your community. you walk into a dirty house, you're not going to clean every room at once.
Right.
You're going to clean the essential rooms first, bathroom, kitchen, get those spick and clean, then you move on.
Right.
And as a state of Maine, 1.3 million people realistically is not that many people.
Right.
Between certain hotspot areas in the river area out west, you have the coastal area out east, you have central Maine hotspots, Bangor, Waterville, Portland. I mean, you get
and then
a
you have
couple
Aroostook
locations.
County, which is like, it's almost like Maine is so varied.
Yeah.
Like, as you have like the city area, Portland,
Yeah.
Waterville, Bangor, Lewiston, Auburn, but then you also have like the
Which
coastal
have
areas.
all their own unique problems.
Right.
And then the coastal is going to have all their
Yeah.
own unique
And
problems.
then our western
Mountains.
Maine, and then Aroostook County. It's like,
Yeah, so
Maine
there's
is
no wholesale
very-
answer. So micromanaging wouldn't be a good idea. I want to get into immigration and how that has played into homelessness, but also the rise of resources and community outreach programs like yours. What do you think the next 5 years looks like? Do you think that community outreach is staying on par with the demand? Or do we as a state need to start looking for more people to help run facilities like this?
I think we're definitely going to need more people, and I think as we're more successful in the programs that we're doing, I think it's going to pull more people that were more hesitant out of the woodwork. That is like, I've been afraid to reach out for help before, but this is my situation and I need help. I just came back in September. When I first started, I had a handful of people, but as I was successful and people in the community were more aware of what I was doing, my caseload, doubled, tripled, quadrupled, like it exploded.
Yeah. To the point that you really can't take any more on, right?
Right. So I try to,
Which is
touch
also
base and
sad, because that means there are more out there,
absolutely.
but you're one person.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And unfortunately, I am not able as a person to say I can't take any more people. So I take people on and kind of be like, I can help you and this is what I can do, but it's limited at this time.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, try to get people, because my program is short. It's only 180 days. Well, I work with people for a little while, and then after I get a mental health diagnosis, I can enroll them in my program. And then I have 180 days after that. I have to get them housed. So it's a very emergent program. I try to pass them off to a case manager, but there aren't a lot of case managers in the state, and the wait lists are crazy.
So in that regard, one, if somebody wanted to help now, are there if somebody did want to get involved in doing something like what you're doing, whether it's your position or something else around, is there higher education that they would need? Is this a position where maybe your program could work with juniors and seniors and local community colleges to get the accreditation so that pretty soon after high school they could just step into a position?
So if they are enrolled in college, so you have to have a bachelor's degree to do what I'm doing.
Okay.
And a MERT-C. So, but we can work with people to get their MERT. So if they have a bachelor's degree in an unrelated field, we're able to work with them to get the trainings that they need.
Okay.
But we're always looking for interns. We get interns from the colleges, and there are volunteer opportunities.
Are there any programs where someone can get paid to learn, where maybe they come in and they change beds and maybe they don't need a bachelor's for every position around here, but is there a way that they could potentially work their way up within the program themselves?
No, we have in the past hired like housing managers, housing managers. So somebody that would be here and would make sure, because the shelters, in order to live in the shelter, you have to be able to live independently. So you do your own house laundry, you do all of the things that you need to be doing to maintain a house, but you have, right now, we're very limited on staff. So we have our case managers that are running the house meeting, checking the chores and stuff that their time could be utilized much efficiently than that. So we could hire somebody. In the past, we've hired people to do that position who didn't necessarily have the same educational requirements. So they're able to check chores and run house meeting and take care of, paperwork that wasn't necessarily like state paperwork or just following up, making sure they're following the rules and stuff, and which would allow them also the experience to be around that, and they could continue their education while working here. We'd be flexible with that.
And just learning how to communicate, because this obviously is a very sensitive area of a profession, and in a lot of regards, it seems to me a lot like nursing in the sense that you're directly helping people in a very sensitive, personal time without all of the blood and gore.
Right. And
as much.
Right. I mean, it has its moments. Like our shelter, our wait list is like 50 people long. And that's people that are just waiting to get into the shelter. And people call the part that I struggle with personally, like they say that you're supposed to have like disconnect and you're supposed, but we're human. Like you feel that.
Yeah.
Like you have empathy. And if you don't, then you have no business in the field. You do have to learn how to separate it and kind of leave it at work, but it's never going to be 100%. There's stuff that you take home. But when people call and they're, 30th on the list, and they're like, but I'm homeless. And I'm like, everybody on the list is homeless. And they're like, I'm living in my car and I have kids. And like, everybody is homeless. I can't say you're more homeless than they are.
Yeah.
And that is hard where
you have to have hard conversations with real people.
You do. And these are real people, and they have lives, and they have experiences, and they have nurses that have come through the shelter. We've had veterans, and we do have big programs for veterans, but
it's not always meeting them at where they need.
Right. And we look at the point in time count, and we're like, there are this many homeless people, but each one of those people, like, is a real person like you or I. Like, they have a story, they have a past, they have goals, and they have aspirations, and so it's hard to be like, you're 30th on the list. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it's being able to say, I understand that you're having a really difficult time, but unfortunately, this is where we're at right now, and I can help them. And that's when I step in, and the people that are on the wait list that want to start working on housing applications and stuff while they're waiting to get in. I'm glad that I can be like, well, I can meet with you, and we can start doing something so you're not just sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
But being able to, like, meet with somebody and then be like, okay, well, now I'm going to go home and they're sleeping under the bridge or they're sleeping in a vehicle. That's different.
It's a hard time to enjoy holidays when
it is.
There are 50 plus families that are suffering.
Yeah, it is. And there are days that way harder than others. And you get some people that come in and they are living in a camper that doesn't have any running water or heat, so they're still technically homeless, but they're okay with it. And then you get people that come in and they're like, I don't know what to do, and I'm lost, and I don't know where to start. And trying to prioritize where my time goes is tricky, because how do you say that your homelessness isn't as important as this person's homelessness? Like, it's difficult.
And so it's definitely going to take a special kind of person to work this job. Just kind of following through with that, one of my major concerns here in the state of Maine is, one, we're getting older. The average age in Maine is 44 and a half years old. Mm-hmm. A lot of young people are leaving the state of Maine and then not necessarily coming back, which then also takes away from our economy and kind of plunges us further into poverty. Mm-hmm. So are there ways, just in theory, if there was an ambitious high schooler, could they do something either their junior or senior year so that way when they graduate, they're ready, maybe a summer of internship, unpaid internship, but is there a way to start actively getting young people in Maine to have a way to contribute back and get paid for it, to keep young people here?
So to do community case management, you don't necessarily have to have a bachelor's degree. You can do it with a MRC, and there are classes that you can take if you reach out to case management organization wherever you live. A lot of them will let you know the classes that you need to take, or you could go through the community college. A lot of times you can pay just for certain classes or for a certification for your MRC. And if you're able to go through and get your MRC, then you're able to do the community case management that we desperately need.
Yeah.
You just can't do, like, anybody that is a minor. You can't work with minors unless you have a bachelor's. And, like, our case management through the shelter, like, homelessness is a different population. So working in this field, like, not this field necessarily, but this organization or program, then you would need to have a bachelor's. But we do hire community case managers that just have.
And beyond that, a facility like this is gonna need to have some paid positions that don't have the higher degree of education
Right.
necessary. So that's encouraging, and I'll include the links below of all of that, so that way, is there a comprehensive list, like what you were just mentioning? Is there anywhere that you can think of that they could
Yes.
just go through a checklist?
So if you go to the community college, like even Central Maine Community College, they have a MERT-C program.
Okay, so it's all set up, you just follow through with what
Right,
they
and they
okay.
have the course list that you need, and when you're done, you have your MERT-C. They also have the BHP class that you can take to be able to help with that.
Are there any incentives that you know about that try to incentivize Mainers to learn these traits, making the education cheaper or
Yes.
specific grants?
We have, it's a loan forgiveness program where if you work for a nonprofit,
Okay.
every payment that you make for your student loans counts towards a 10-year forgiveness. So they do income based. So if you pay $0 a month after working at a nonprofit for 10 years, your student loans are forgiven because you're working at a nonprofit.
Okay. And that's pretty much federally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that is a federal program.
What I would be encouraged by is if I'm just more old school, I'm more teach a person to fish, don't give them a fish.
Right.
So it's awesome to have the resources there when somebody trips and falls to pick them up again. But what would be really nice is having programs, resources, incentive long before any of that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Where someone that's in high school, they want to stay in Maine, but they don't want to work at a big box chain store.
Right.
And mom and pop stores are going down the drain. So it's often hard to figure out what to do in the state to make a good income that you can live the life that you want without being wealthy, just having enough to get by. So if we were to offer incentives to say, hey, the federal income, you work for 10 years, you can pay off your student loans. But guess what? Because we want to keep young people here in the state of Maine, we're actually going to offer a $5,000 grant where you never have to pay this back. It is given to you, but it's with the understanding that after you graduate, you're giving us a 6-8 year contract, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Because those kind of programs would be beneficial. It encourages people to work hard.
Mm-hmm.
And what would be really an inspiring story is if you have someone that enters into this facility but then ends up in a position like yours.
Yep.
Where they started at the bottom, they worked their way through all this, they know what it's like, and now
And we've had,
the facility has incentive within it to say, hey, we have an opening, you need to get a job.
Mm-hmm.
If you sign this contract and abide by these rules, then you have sustainable income for the next however long you're willing to stay here.
We've had people that have come through the shelter and then later on came back, or they volunteered and then they came back and they've worked here. The problem is it's a lot of, once people get housed, they work with one of our housing navigators for a year. And if they're enrolled in one of our programs, they can't work here. But once that year is up, even if they were still receiving a Section 8 voucher, they can come on and they can work. So working through working with one of our case managers or the housing navigators, we would be able to tell them, these are the classes that you have to take, and work with them through that period of time that they're working our program, and say, all right, now we're finishing, and you're also on track to graduate, and then come back.
Awesome. I appreciate Courtney giving me all this time. I do still have just a couple. So briefly, I wanted to touch on homelessness and veterans. Specifically here in Oxford, are homeless vets a big issue, or is that more in other counties?
Well, I think it can be anywhere in the state. It's not as much. Once a veteran has been identified as homeless, we have to get paperwork showing that they are a veteran, that they were discharged from the military. And then their housing programs is a VASH, which is housing assistance specifically for veterans.
Okay.
And as soon as we can prove that they're a veteran, they can get into one of those programs, and they are the easiest to house. There are definitely resources out there that are geared specifically towards veterans, which is as it should be.
Yeah, and I was really encouraged. There's a group, No Homeless Vets by June 2025. So they are actively working towards getting veterans off the streets.
Yep.
And to me, you cannot have a first world society if you are not protecting and taking care of those that protected and took care of you.
Absolutely.
Or children. If you have either of those, I don't think you deserve the title of first world.
Right.
Because look at the inequity and look at the despair. And so personally, my heroes wear dog tags, so vets, when they've served overseas or here and they come home, they have, in my mind, a right, an actual legal right to be taken care of by those that they gave their lives to take care of.
Yeah, there are two classes. We have anybody that's a veteran or a class member has additional rights, and there's certain protocols that we go through for both of them, and both of them are protected classes. So our veterans, like, it's right on our referral sheet that I fill out with people. So it's veteran and class member, and that's like the two big ones. If either of those are checked, that's our first priority.
Okay.
Like I said before, like, I can't say you're more homeless than you are, but people that are in protected classes do automatically, they don't go on a wait list.
That makes sense. That, and as it should be.
Right.
So that's obviously homeless vets. They can't find houses if they don't come forward. Not all vets do come forward. A lot of them don't even come forward for free lunches just to say a thank you. Mainers are a stubborn lot, but so are vets. And so we, as a community, can only help you if you come forward. So if you are a vet and you need assistance, please come forward, because this is exactly why these programs are here. And if there's money to be spent, it deserves to be spent on the vets, because how else are we going to continue to have people serve and protect us if they're afraid that when they come back they're a second-class citizen?
Right.
And so much of the time it does seem like second-class citizenship. Which leads me into my final topic, and it's a hot-button one. It is, at this point, a global issue because of the amount of wars, the amount of conflict all over the globe, refugees everywhere, and so immigration has become part of our everyday lives for every single person, and needs to be a nuanced conversation because they are human as well.
Right.
And all humans should be cherished and taken care of. That being said, if you're on an airplane and the airplane has masks come down, you have to get your mask on first before taking care of anyone else, because you'll pass out in no time.
Right.
And once you're passed out, you're not getting a mask on your face or your kid's face. It doesn't make sense to put a mask on your face and then start reaching over and putting masks on your neighbors' faces, ignoring those in the seat next to you.
Right.
So it seems like a cycle where illegal immigration is only going to lead to more inequality and inequity and cause more people to have to then flee or leave, causing this mass migration. And it is a sensitive topic, but it goes back to the theme of communities taking care of their own community. And Janet Mills has said that she wants to have 75,000 new immigrants, foreign-born immigrants, by 2029. 75,000 is a lot of people.
That is a lot of people.
In a state the size of Maine. And that means that there is a lot of resources and money being spent towards that will otherwise not be spent on something else, like taking care of the rising amount of homeless children. So, illegal immigrants, if you're watching this, it's not that you're not welcome, it's not that we don't care for you as human, but it comes a point where you have to start looking out for your community. So, there's a lot of funds being spent on immigrants here in the state of Maine right now. And when I talk to coworkers, when I talk to friends, typically Mainers' biggest worries, other than the rising cost of electricity and living, is immigration and vets and how they're being taken care of. And Janet Mills is also announcing that she's opening a new office, the Office of New Americans. It's going to be a 4-person to start off with, 4-person organization with a 19-person chair, and I can only guess how much money is going to be allocated every single year to this program. I can only guess because I literally can't find it anywhere. But Janet Mills was just in Westbrook celebrating the opening of this new office, but there's no transparency in what's being spent, how it's being spent, and it doesn't seem sustainable. Down in Brunswick, I have to drive past the housing for 2 years for illegal immigrants. Illegal immigrants for 2 years get free housing. As far as I know, we don't offer anything like that for Maine citizens.
No.
I mean, to be in a shelter like this, or to be in a program like this, you have to be actively helping yourself.
Yeah.
You can't just sign a contract and you're Gucci for 2 years. There is work involved, as there should be.
Right.
It shouldn't be on a case manager to get another person out of a hole. It should be combined effort.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that just fundamentally irks me, because nowhere in Maine do Mainers get that kind of handout. But this is Maine dollars that are paying for that. How do you think moving forward, immigration, especially illegal immigration, is going to impact your job and the quality of your work?
I think it goes back to different areas of Maine have different struggles. Fairly isolated from the immigration in Western Maine. So I'm a little embarrassed to say I'm not super familiar with like all of the information that you've just told me. Immigrants that have come through our shelter, through our program that I'm aware of. I was gone for a period of time, but the limited resources and how rural the area that I work in, it really cuts us off from that. And it goes back to everybody taking care of their own community and their neighbors. And it kind of, because there's so much in Oxford County that we're looking at and there's so much to take care of in this area, it's difficult to lift your head up and look at the issues that are in other areas.
Absolutely.
So that is definitely one of the areas that has been more of a struggle in the Lewiston, Auburn area, or Portland, Bangor.
Then raises the issue of, if Janet Mills' projection goes through and there's 75,000 new immigrants, it means that it's not going to be equally distributed across the state. It means that there are going to be focal points where Portland as a sanctuary city, Lewiston, Auburn as another hotspot, and then certain other areas, they're heavily going to be struggling with this, where other areas may not even know about it.
Right.
And if there was some kind of distribution because of the connection to community, if immigrants were to move to an area like Oxford, I think that they would actually receive more personal help than they would if they were to stay in an area like Lewiston and Auburn or Portland, because of how flooded it is and because community looks out for each other.
Like if you move to Rumford tomorrow, you're part of our community.
Yeah,
and we're gonna
and it doesn't matter where you came from.
And
so
honestly,
you'll be taken care of.
If Janet Mills is paying this extra attention to this and allowing resources, may almost be beneficial if immigration was to rise in the Oxford County area, because we're so isolated from everywhere and we have no public transportation. Well, we have some, but we don't have public transportation that's going to Lewiston, Auburn.
I mean, essentially, we don't really have public transportation.
But maybe that would make it so that resources were more readily available to the people that are already in the community.
Okay, that's a fair point.
Because
since
more
Mills has already announced that she is going to be giving assistance to it, it could be beneficial to have some of that
community,
in the community.
it would be, everybody would benefit from more public transportation or more employment, more housing, more caseworkers, more staff.
Yeah.
I obviously can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen, and like I said, I'm very unknowledgeable when it comes to how the programs work with immigrants. So that's just kind of my guess. Like,
to be fair, from what I've researched, there isn't a whole lot to know, which is actually deeply concerning to me.
Right.
Because if we are giving 2 years free rent to someone, I want to know who they are, like, I don't personally need to know who they are, but as a state, we need to have records of who these people are. We need to know a lot about their past. You can't come into a situation like this and not share personal details. Right. So that should be expected, number one. Right. Two, there should be strict guidelines. And if you break those guidelines even a little bit, let alone the law, if you break the law as an immigrant and you're not even part of this community, part of this nation yet, and you break the law, I'm sorry, you have to go. You have a deep disrespect for our rules already, and it shows. But if you don't break the law, but you're in this housing, it's not fair for people, Mainers, to have such deep guidelines and rules in order to stay in a program like this, but not have any guidelines or rules for illegal immigrants who are benefiting for 2 full years. And anyone that doesn't work for 2 years becomes a lazy piece of, like, that's just whoever it is, especially men that do not work for 2 years don't become good individuals. And I'm not saying that they can't be doing something else during those 2, but if you're just sitting around for 2 years, like a lot of us were during the pandemic, became lousy people. And then you have to stop being a lousy person and dig your way out of that. We can't have this free room and board and no rules and regulations for people that are coming from without, when from within we have high standards and we have expectations. So there's a lot more, and honestly, it doesn't surprise me that you don't know a whole lot about the immigration here in Maine, because one, it's pretty brand new. Two, there really is nothing to know other than the caption headlines. If you try to dig in like I have, there's really no substance, which is deeply concerning. There's no forethought, well, after 2 years, these people that lived in this housing for free, what's the housing going to look like? How much is it going to cost to remodel? Who's going to pay to remodel? And then where are they going? Are they going to leave? Because there have been groups across the U.S. where they literally refuse to leave. They're given hotels, immigrants are given hotels, and then the police can't get them to leave because they just take over. And obviously, that's not categorical, that's not a general statement, but when you're comfortable as a person, you're not going to want to leave that comfort, especially for unknown. So it is pretty natural. But that being said, there has to be rules and regulations and guidelines and things that common citizens can turn to and be like, justice system, this isn't just, because if you don't trust the justice system, you're not going to turn to it. And then there's no point in that system anymore. And then you have vigilante justice, which is scary.
It is scary. We had a lot of issues with the homeless population, or people had issues with the homeless population, and thinking, well, we'll just go out and we'll take care of it. And we had people go out and they were like cutting tents, and like, this is the only shelter that people had, and so they're trying to take it into their own hands.
And that's not the right way to do it, and you're making it worse and then further damning our resources, because then they need a tent.
Right.
People cannot live outside under the stars in Maine. I mean, maybe like 3 weeks out of the year.
Right.
Like, you just can't really do it. And so that's the problem, is if there's no justice system, people will take it into their own hands and then do whatever they personally think.
Right.
And
a
that's
lot
not
of
a
people
good
are
place
making
to be.
Rash decisions with minimal information.
Yeah.
And it's dangerous.
And that's what I hope to achieve with this video, is just to bring more awareness to the situation, to kind of humanize these numbers. I mean, there are 5,000 people, at least in the state of Maine, that are homeless currently, and that's tragic. We are deep in winter. It's 2 degrees out in the morning when we wake up, colder out west, and we need to do something about this. And I personally am not someone that waits around for those in charge, the adults in charge, to do something. And I can tell that you and this facility are not either, because if we were, we would still be waiting. So, just ending really quickly, what is your opinion, and I don't know how much you stay involved in this, but with the homeless encampments in Portland, was it a good idea to uproot those people in the middle of the winter, or should we have looked at keeping it? And what's your opinion on what's happened with the homeless encampments in Portland? I don't know if you know too much about how There was down by Back Bay, there was that encampment, and then they dissolved that in the fall, and then just recently they dissolved the one that was underneath the bridge.
So I think anytime you break up an encampment, it makes it really difficult to get resources to them. If you are taking people that are in an encampment and putting them in a centralized location like a shelter or a warming center or something like that, then that's one thing. But like we had code enforcement and the police department would come and they would say, this homelessness is a problem, and they would come to meetings and they would say, we need to get this under control, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm here, like I can help. But then they would go to the encampments and they're like, you can't be here, you need to leave. So then again, there's one of me. If I'm in an encampment and there's 10 people there, I can go there and I can give resources to 10 people in one stop. When they go there and they say, you can't be here, you need to go, then they all go off in separate areas. And then they go find where they are and say, you can't be here. So then the two groups of 5 split up even more. And then I've got 10 people in random spots in the woods. So I spent an entire day hiking through the woods, trying to find people. And like they were in a tent up behind a hotel. And then I had other people that were behind a bridge over on the other side of town. So it takes a lot more effort and a lot more resources to reach these people to actually take care of the problem when they dissolve the encampments. I understand the reasoning behind it. I understand the property destruction that happens. We went under the bridge and cleaned up in Rumford. We did a candlelight vigil, and we had a lot of community members or community workers in our area that slept under the bridge to raise awareness. And my kids came out and we helped clean up under the bridge and everything. And there are a lot of syringes, and there's dangers with people being in an encampment and to the general population about, needle disposal and like just the general issues with that. So I understand why they do it, but it makes it more difficult for us to take care of the root of the problem when they do that.
That's a really interesting point, because as a caseworker, I can see how it makes your job incredibly a lot easier. I guess on the counter side of that, then it almost seems like those people then don't try to get help because they're comfortable where they're at.
Right.
The one thing that concerned me, and the one thing that keeps coming up when I talk to people, is that Augusta, at the time, I think it was late last year, the homeless shelter had 118 spots open or so. And only about 16 from the camp that got dissolved actually went to seek shelter. And most of them sourced that they couldn't actively use drugs anymore. That is one of those cycles, because not everyone that's homeless does drugs.
Correct.
But
not everybody that does drugs is homeless either.
Yes,
so it does go.
And the longer you stay homeless, I think the propensity to using drugs also goes up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where it's a cycle. You can be a decent human being that's down on their luck, that lost a job and a house due to fire, yada, yada, yada. Now you're homeless, you're trying, but sometimes, like the story earlier, it's easier to get hard drugs than it is to get something that you need. Mm-hmm. You just do it for the night just to be able to sleep through the cold. Now you have this addiction, now you need this. And so it is mental health. Again, there is lack of mental health because those people that are using drugs often have something underlying that's not being addressed that should be focused on. And if not us, but if there were groups that actually evaluated the mental process of it, and we were to study it over years to understand, and of course every homeless person is going to be different, but I think that if we were to actually study homelessness, to actually make it a type of science, like why is this happening? There are those that want it, but then there are those that deeply do not want it, but have to. And then just studying that. And with drugs, like, do drugs ultimately keep people out of it? Or is that just the excuse because it's actually these other things that keep people out? Are the rules too strict that you just don't even want to bother, so you don't. Is the waiting list too long, so you don't even bother? But then in the meantime, you get addicted. There's just such a cycle. And dealing with homelessness, I'm actually glad that I dealt with this as the first interview, because from here I can just spiral off.
Right.
And there is so much that goes with it. I mean, if you follow mental health, then you can follow it to gun rights, then you can follow it to Second Amendment. I mean, you can look at homelessness to immigration, to the funding of our state, to who's running our state, to all of these things and the big plan. And so this has been really exciting for me, and I am really thankful that you were willing to let me interview you today. And I look forward to the viewers' comments and feedback. So please make sure to comment and let me know what you thought of this interview. Also, if you have any follow-up questions for Courtnie, personally, I think that there's more here. Now that I know what I'm doing, I think that there could be more specific conversations that dig more into an area instead of just a broad overview, because I think a lot of times when we deal with homelessness, it's a broad overview.
Yeah.
But even just here, homelessness, are we talking homeless vets, homeless children, homeless immigrants? Because each one of those has their own special everything. So even that could be broken up that way. So I already have more questions, and if you have questions, I would love to share them with Courtnie and get her feedback, and look forward to just filling February with more interviews. And I don't think this is the last time you're going to see Courtnie, because I have another interview set up with Buck's Guns out of Lisbon, Maine. So I think Courtnie and I are going to go buy a gun and do some shooting together.
Yeah.
So this has been Drew Hoagland with Mainstream Current. This is Courtnie of the Homeless Outreach Program here in Oxford County, Maine. And until next time, bub, have a great day.